Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we explore the inner game of writing and inspire you to start, finish, and publish your book. I'm Mark Desvaux, and this week I'm treating you to the best of the Bestseller Experiment. I've delved through and handpicked my favourite shows of the 500 plus that we've done of best-selling authors who have collectively sold over 1 billion books. Who's it going to be this week? Let's run the show.
Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark Desvaux. So Mark, would you like to tell our amazing audience which amazing guest we've got today?
It's Michael Connelly, Mark.
Mr. Connelly.
Just the most successful American crime writer evs. He's amazing. And he was in the UK recently promoting his new book, The Wrong Side of Goodbye, which is a Harry Bosch novel. Now, if you're an Amazon Prime TV customer, you'll know all about Harry Bosch because it was the first TV series commissioned by Amazon as their first standalone TV show. And it's just been renewed for, I think, a 4th season, starring Titus Welliver as Harry Bosch. And these are just, really fantastically compelling crime dramas set on the mean streets of LA. And Harry is a regular recurring character for Michael. Michael started out as a crime journalist on the LA Times and various newspapers, and he's now written 29 novels, one work of nonfiction, which we do talk about in the interview. He's sold over 60 million copies of his books worldwide. He's translated all over the world, and he's just one of the biggest authors in the world today. So I got the opportunity to spend 10 minutes in the back of a car with him. He'd just come out of an interview with Audible in the UK, and I was waiting outside, invited, I should hasten to say.
Well, no, you say that, Mark. We know the actual story. The actual story is the car was going past. Mark was on his way. Mark was on his way to the fan. Exactly. He was on the way to the tube and he saw this cab go past with Michael Connelly and he started sprinting, which, I remember back to our sports day at school, and that is a sight to behold. But he started sprinting down the road. It was at least 30 miles an hour the cab was going. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, well, it's it had a roof rack, and I was able to climb on the top. So
was it through the sunroof? And you managed to take over the steering wheel?
Yeah, well, anything for the podcast. You know me, Mark. Anything for the podcast. Actually, kudos to the publicist Ben, who, when you see the schedule for these authors when they come to the UK, it is by the minute. And Michael had got off the plane. He went straight to Audible. He did the interview there. He got in the car, and Ben said, you've got like 10 minutes between, from the car, picking him up and taking Michael to his hotel. He hadn't even checked into his hotel yet. and he had to put up with me asking him questions in the back of a car. So, kudos to the publicist Ben for getting us in there. And actually, because of the traffic, we got about 15 minutes, which is great.
Yeah. We actually paid someone to spill a load of oranges off the back of their truck. So this is Mark in the back of a cab in London with none other than Michael Connelly.
Michael Connelly, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, Wrong Side of Goodbye, you're returning to Harry Bosch and Mickey Haller again this time. What is it about these two characters that you keep coming back to them?
I guess the quick answer is that I feel unfinished business about both of them. I think there's always more to say, or so far that's how I felt, and that's why I bring them back. There's other characters I've written about, and after 1 or 2 books, I feel like I've said what there needs to be said. So it's a really hard thing to pinpoint why. Why is there more to say about Harry Bosch? I don't really know, but he just remains intriguing to me, and as long as you have that as a writer, you're going to dive in and go back to those kind of characters.
Would it be fair to say there's quite a bit of Harry Bosch, of you in Harry Bosch?
Yeah, it's fair to say that now. It really depends. I've written about him for about 25 years, and initially I wanted to write about someone completely different from me because I had no idea whether that book would ever get published, and I wanted to have fun during the year or two that I wrote it. So initially we were nothing alike, and then I got lucky and it got published, and then there was a call for another book and then another book, and over time keeping that separation was really impossible. So I started sharing more and more with him. Probably most notably is that we have daughters the same age, so the whole fatherhood concept is a shared experience between me and Harry.
Was that ever intimidating? When you're about 2 or 3 books in, did you ever think, okay, I have a serious character. Am I worried he's ever going to run out of steam? Am I going to have to put more of me in there? Did that ever give you pause?
No, not really. I mean, I guess, I don't know. If you're going to do this for a living, I guess you have to have some level of confidence that you have more than one character in you. So I always felt like I would know ahead of any readers or critics that I've run out of steam and it's time to end the series, and I will just come up with something else. So, I don't want to ever be in a position where I feel like I'm kind of keeping him on life support or something just so I can kick out another book. When I feel that, I think that's the time to end the series.
Okay, your background is in journalism, and one of my favorite books of yours is, in fact, Crime Beat, which is the collection of non-fiction articles. Now, one of the things with reality and a lot of the stories in Crime Beat is they don't necessarily have a happy ending or even a resolution. There's a lot of open endings there.
Right.
Is your fiction some way of redressing that?
I guess it is in a way. I mean, some of the books I've written have been inspired by stories I wrote as a newspaper reporter that didn't have endings. I remember, when I retired from being a journalist and was a full-time writer, and I was clearing out my file cabinets at the newspaper, I had tons of files that I would open when there was a murder or something I wrote about. I would create a file and I'd write inside it the detective's name and number, and put anything that was pertinent to that case into that file, so I'd be ready to go as soon as they caught somebody. And I was like getting rid of dozens of files of cases that they didn't catch anybody. So it was like a cold water in the face that I was leaving that world of reality to become a writer whose books always have everything tied up at the end. So it was kind of a bit of a dark day, but it was also a good reminder to not tie everything up. There's always going to be loose ends. And yes, I have to, conclude a big, mystery at the end of every book, because that's why people read them. But it was a great reminder to not solve everything, to always leave something untied, even if that bothers a reader. It's my little acknowledgement that crime fiction is quite different from crime nonfiction.
Harry, of course, in some of the more recent novels, he has been working cold cases. He has been going back and opening up those cases. Looking back at the Crime Beat stories, is there a case that you'd want to go back to and reopen? Or?
Yeah, there's one. It's called the Vic Weiss case, and I actually did write a novel called Trunk Music that kind of solved it, But the reality of the case, this was a guy who was like a car dealer, kind of famous because he did commercials and stuff in Los Angeles, who was found in the trunk of his car, shot to death, his Rolls Royce, in fact. And that was never solved. And I got to know the detectives on that case pretty well and spent time with them. And, they had their theories, but they just had nothing they could ever prove. And it's kind of been a lasting mystery in Los Angeles that would be really interesting to know what really happened.
Now, how important is making an emotional connection for you? Because a lot of crime novels, they're seen as puzzles to be solved, the locked room mystery, that sort of thing. But certainly with your books, there's a lot of focus on the cops, there's a lot of focus on the victims. How important is that emotional connection with the reader for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's really important for me as a writer. I just don't want to write a perfectly honed plot. To me, that's window dressing on a character story. So I always want to have a character at the center of the story, and that brings in the emotional stakes and so forth. And that's how I get through, a year of writing a book. That's quite a different thing than reading a book, which can take you, 2-3 days a week, something much shorter. So I have to make sure I'm plugged in to write the book. And if that works, I just have this belief, if it works for me, then it's going to work for the reader. But I also, sorry for the long answers, but I do think that's what the readers are looking for. There is a percentage that just want to be fooled or they want to outsmart the writer, and all that's fine. But I think generally readers are looking for an emotional connection with a character, an emotional experience.
Has a reader ever given you feedback on a book or spoken to you about something that you thought, that's not what I intended, but actually you're completely spot on there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example, but that's happened a few times where it's funny. It's usually someone gets a higher meaning or metaphor out of something that you either had no idea about or it was subconscious, and it is there and it works. And of course, your answer is always, "Oh yeah, I meant that." So.
How has your writing technique changed since you started out? I mean, you're a journalist, so you're used to hitting deadlines. You're probably a very efficient writer as well. There's no fat in your books. But in terms of sitting down at your desk and writing, how has that changed over the last few years?
The big change is the distractions outside of that, but the actual work when you're at your desk or at your computer, for me, hasn't changed. It's, to me, the changes are getting to that desk, getting the time to get there. There's a TV show now based on Bosch that I'm involved in. There's book tours and so forth. And, my life has gotten more complicated. And by that, I mean, it just makes the time that I'm in a room by myself, in the locked room by myself, trying to create and write. It makes those times more precious because they're harder to get to. That room hasn't changed, but I would say one thing that has changed is my ever-developing skill to be able to write when I'm not in that room, like write on planes, write in the back of cars, write while waiting for planes, in hotel rooms, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of weird. It's come back full circle to journalism where you just had to write every day, and sometimes you had to write on a telephone, calling someone who's writing it for you and working it out over a phone and so forth. More of a catch as catch can lifestyle and writing style, and it's kind of more like that now for me.
Are you someone who outlines very much, or do you tend to jump in with both feet these days?
I went through many years of never outlining, never putting anything on paper. It was just more fun to write that way. In my head, I would know the beginning and the end, and that's all I needed and to start off. And then about 4 years ago, we started working on a television show based on Bosch. And, we have a writing staff, and we sit in a room, and we essentially outline. We put 3x5 cards up on the wall for each episode, and they're very heavily outlined in that way. And I began to kind of see the merit in that. And that's kind of influenced my writing as of late. I don't do the cards on the wall type thing, but now I'm writing more stuff down in a notebook. Maybe that's a function of age, or I'm worried I'm going to forget it or something. But I wrote maybe 20 books without ever putting anything on paper other than the book itself.
Right.
And I don't do that so much anymore.
Okay, but as a consequence of working with TV writers, it's changing your technique.
Yeah, I think so. I've enjoyed being in those rooms where things are talked out, and I'm so used to being in a room by myself where I guess I could talk to myself if I wanted to, but basically it's just me against the blank screen of the computer. And I've kind of seen the merit in how you do TV.
When you first started out writing as a novelist, did you have a vision? Did you have some kind of end game? Did you ever think, I want to get into the New York Times bestsellers, or was it simple as, I just want to write one book to see if I can do it?
Well, I decided I wanted to write crime fiction, specifically crime fiction, not just I want to be a novelist. I wanted to write crime fiction when I was 19. And I didn't publish a book till I was 35. So it was like a long process. And, at those early stages, first, you want to see if you can accomplish it. Second, you want to see if it can be published. Third, you want to see if you can do it again, and so forth. So it's never it's too much of a long shot proposition to ever be thinking about, I'm going to become a bestseller, or I'm going to hit the top of the charts, or anything like that. I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't think about that once I was established and things were going well. You always want to, if you're a storyteller, if you have the ego of a storyteller, meaning you think the stories that you write should be read and heard and watched and so forth, then, you do think about the larger scale of things as you go along. But, when I'm writing my first book, that's not even a concept. The concept is, I hope this is a good book. I hope someone other than my mother will read it someday.
And you mentioned ego. Does it take a lot of ego to write? Is there, like we said, there's a bit of you in Harry Bosch. Is there a lot of you in all of your books?
I guess so. I mean, I think it's impossible not to do that. Not to put some of yourself in there. I don't know if that comes out of ego or it comes out of, this is what I have, this is what I can reach, and this is what I can fold into a story. But there has to be an ego. Harry Bosch has the ego that tells him that he's better and smarter and more relentless than any of the opponents that he comes up against. Opponents meaning killers who think they've gotten away with something. He needs that lights his fire, and so I think from the writing standpoint, I go into it believing that this book that I'm about to write, or that I'm in the middle of writing or finishing, should be published, should be celebrated, should be read by everybody, way more than whatever happens. But, I think you got to do that. I mean, it's a long process. I mean, I'm actually a fast writer, but to me, it's a long process to write one book a year. To start with 0 pages and 0 words on the screen, and know that you need 100,000 of them, and they got to be all connected and make sense and be thrilling and hit all the points that a reader wants in a book. It's a bit daunting at the beginning. And so I think it does take that kind of ego to, it's a bit daunting, but I'm up to this task.
And what happens on those days when you're just not feeling it, but you've got a deadline to reach, you've got to write those 100,000 words? What compels you to keep going? Or do you take a day off?
Well, I think this is like a basic, it's odd to say, like, I had a teacher who taught me this, because every writing teacher tells you this, that if you're going to be a writer, you got to write every day, even if you only get 15 minutes in. So I do practice that. When I start a draft of a book, I write every day at least 15 minutes till I'm done that draft. And then I might take a week off, and then I'll go back and rewrite. So it's not like I write every day of my life, but when I start a project, I write on it every day till I get it done. And sometimes it truly is only 15 minutes because of things going on in your life or whatever, or hardships in the story. But if you hit a wall in the story, I don't think the answer is to take a day off. I think, mostly what I do is back up and rewrite, and usually create a momentum that takes me through the stalled part.
Do you write sequentially? Because I speak to some authors, and they will sometimes write the fun bits first, the bits that they know are coming. But for you, is it very much starting at point A and moving through to point Z?
Yeah, it's A to Z for me. There'll be a great chapter ahead, or a fun chapter. But jumping ahead to it, I think, to me, it's kind of like that's a reward if you get there. So don't skip a part. Get there, fight your way through to get there, and then there's a reward when you get to that chapter that you've known is sitting out there and going to be good to write.
And if a writer was to come to you and you only had time to give them one single writing tip to inspire them to keep going, what would that be?
It's, so clichéic, but the cliches are cliches because they're true. I mean, to me, it's like, be relentless, write every day. Let it take over your life. I hate to say it, but, you got to sacrifice not complete relationships, but you have to put relationships on hold. The writing should always come first. And then, if you have a family, you find a balance because, you can't sacrifice a family relationship. But, I constantly face battle in my own family because I work at home and it appears I lead a life of leisure that my wife or my kid think I can just go do something. And I constantly am saying, no, I'm working. I work for a living. And I can't do that, or I can't take off and do this.
And what's next for you, Michael?
Just keeping my head down and continuing to write. It's, we talked earlier, it's the distractions that I fight now that keep me from being, in a room by myself and writing. I just always am. What's next is I'm always trying to find my way back to that room.
And what are you reading at the moment? Or do you find much time to read at all? Do you read in fiction or outside of fiction?
It's a bad answer because to say like I never read is wrong, but I read less and less because I can write at most times people are reading. So on a plane, I don't read, I write. I don't really take vacations because I might be like in a Caribbean island somewhere, but I'm sitting there with my laptop. When I do have time to read, I would rather read nonfiction, biographies, things like that may have an inspirational effect on me. Reading about someone and how they create music somehow. I have a huge collection of biographies of jazz musicians, and something about the way they create music is inspiring to me in terms of putting words on a page. But I write crime fiction, so I got to keep my hand in crime fiction as well. So I dabble around, and yesterday I picked up a book by Steve Kavanaugh called The Plea, which is in the realm of the Lincoln Lawyer. So I want to read about that, read what he's doing, and maybe there's something there that will inspire something with the Lincoln Lawyer guy. You never know. So it's good to be all over the place. I don't like religiously read any one author anymore. Because I don't have the time to do that and also see what's new out there.
So when you read someone like Steve Kavanaugh, and The Plea is a terrific book, it's really good fun, real page-turning stuff. Does it kind of make you think? Is it like in the Western, you got the old gunslinger and you got the young gunslinger comes into town? Is it a bit like that for you? Do you feel like you have to up your game?
No, I mean it's interesting. I think on the outside, people think that all these writers are competitive and it, the fact is no one reads just one book, a year, so there's room for all of us to be successful. And I think it's more of a encouraging type thing. So I'm not going to read Steve's book and think I have to top this or something like that. I'll read it and probably have good feelings that somebody else is doing this well.
Michael Connelly, thank you so much for your time. And Wrong Side of Goodbye is available now.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Isn't it incredible, Mark, to be speaking with someone who sold 60 million novels? I can't even begin to think about that. You think of like a stadium and you think, that would probably fill, I can't even imagine, 10, 20 stadiums. What an incredible story, and what an interesting guy as well. I really, it's quite unique to speak to somebody who's, well, first it's unique to speak to someone in the back of a cab, but it's really interesting, his background as a journalist. It seems like that was a great kind of base for his novels.
Editors will tell you that journalists and screenwriters make very good novelists because they're used to working to a deadline, and they're used to taking notes, and they're used to people just putting a big red pen through their precious work because they just shrug, okay, yeah, that's what I do in the day job anyway, so let's get on with it. I thought it was interesting that, because his non-fiction book, Crime Beat, is a really compelling read, but it's kind of saddening because so much true crime doesn't have a proper resolution in the way that a satisfying crime novel does. So it does seem to me he's redressing the balance there by taking Harry Bosch out into the world, who is this incredible smart cop, and bringing the bad guys to justice, and the thing with Michael as well, 60 million copies sold, but he's still writing good books. There are a lot of authors out there, as I've said before, but sometimes, they kind of write the same book every time. But with Michael, with the Harry Bosch books in particular, they're kind of in real time. They reflect a changing America, So if you read one of his books from 15, 20 years ago, they're going to be very different to the kind of book you're reading now. And that's what's really fascinating. Harry Bosch is growing with the times. They're kind of set in real time.
It was really interesting to hear him say about how that unfinished nature of a book is actually quite essential to keep hold of. The fact that he, as a journalist, he had this big file with all these unsolved cases, which were probably, fantastic fodder to go into when you're looking for ideas for stories. But I love the way he said about how you shouldn't ever leave everything neatly tied up in a bow. It's the first time I've come across that. Have you heard that before?
Well, it's interesting because I read his books. I really enjoy his books. They do have a reality to them in that they're, it's not like Scooby-Doo where, you're the guy who did it and off you go to jail.
The guy at the fun fair.
Exactly. Old man Simpkins. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for the meddling kids. But with these, there is a kind of reality to them as well, especially with his other character, Mickey Haller, who was first book was the Lincoln lawyer. And Mickey Haller appears in the Bosch books now. And, he's that wheeler-dealer legal lawyer kind of guy who's always trying to make a deal. And, it's sometimes in a couple of books, the felon does kind of get away with it, but there's always some other price to pay. So if the law doesn't get you, something else will. But I think, again, that's the journalist in him. He knows not to tell just a pat story. And Michael comes from that great American crime writing tradition where the good guys don't always win, So, yeah, that's what keeps his books fascinating, I think. And his stories are... It sounds like damning with faint praise, but they're easy to read. They're page turners, they're unpretentious, and what's compelling are the characters and the crimes, So it's that's why he's so successful. This is a classic holiday read, Michael Connelly. You think, okay, I'm going on holiday. I want a really good page turning novel. I want something that's going to be fun. You pick up a Connelly.
We also got a really interesting glimpse into the world of a super successful author in that it became, it was quite interesting to hear actually how it does, we all dream of being that author that sells 60 million copies of a book. I dream of being an author that will sell 60 copies of our book.
Easy, Tiger.
But I do think that we got quite an insight there into the challenges of being super successful.
That was absolutely fascinating to me because what seems to have happened to him, because he started writing when he was a journalist. He, like a lot of writers, like myself, he's got a day job and you write around the day job. And then he's gone through a period when he's been able to quit the day job and write full time. And then he's become incredibly successful. So he has to do all this legwork, traveling the country, traveling the world, dealing with distractions. And when he said the word distractions, I was thinking, oh, he means me.
He pushes you out the cab door.
So he's having to deal with distractions, So in some ways, it's like he's got a day job again. He's having to cope with the success, the admin side, if you like, of success. But this is crucial, and this is for anyone out there who's writing who says, oh, I haven't got the time, 15 minutes.
Yeah,
he says if he gets 15 minutes, no excuses, people. If Michael Connelly can write a bestseller in a year with 15 minutes to spare, then you can, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, you think about how much time we spend writing emails each day. That's probably at least 15 minutes in my case, sometimes hours and hours. But I think that was great. The fact that he said he does, we talk about the write every day. I think this is becoming such a theme. We have to give it an acronym, and I've come up with a WED. Write every day.
WED.
So that's going to be our new phrase. But what he did say, which I found interesting, is for him, it's about almost like a ritual. He has to write every day when he's on his project, and he might take a few weeks off, but it's almost like sacrilege to miss a day if he's on the project. He has to keep on writing because he knows that will get him past the finish line.
And he's writing on vacation. He's writing on the move. He's had to learn how to write in cars and on planes. And I write on the train every day to work, and write on the train back. Terry Pratchett used to do this, and he used to do really extensive author tours. I mean, he'd spend a month promoting his book, going around the country. But he'd have a driver, and he'd be in the back with his laptop, tapping away. And that's how Terry did 2 books a year. If you can get your head down and write wherever you are, then that's just going to add to your word count.
Well, and in some ways, I think we're really lucky in today's kind of world where we have iPads and be able to have a laptop. You think about 10, 20, 30 years ago, even that wouldn't have been possible, apart from, having to get your legs amputated if you had some kind of computer on them.
Now, Mark, this is showing your techno joy here, because you remember we talked about chalk and slate.
Well, there is a thing called pen and paper, I guess.
And pen and paper, yeah.
But in terms of, look at Michael's problem that he's got so many things that he has to do. He has to go to TV meetings where they're talking about plots, and so for him, I think anyone writing on something that isn't electronic is giving themselves a lot of extra work. But saying that, I guess you could have someone like Barbara Cartland who could kind of have an editor or a transcriber that would do it for them.
Well, he did talk about, and again, I guess this is an old journalist trick as well. He did talk about phoning the story to someone who would then type it down, because that's what journalists do. They go to a press conference, they run to the phone and say, okay, here's the headline from this press conference or whatever, back in the day. He gets on the phone to someone. I guess he has an assistant who, I've had an idea, write this down. I mean, I do a thing where I'll email myself if I'm out and about and an idea occurs to me. I've got my phone, I'll just email that so I don't forget it.
Yeah, a lot of people use voicemail as well. They'll leave themselves a voicemail message, which is quite a neat idea as well.
Yeah, I tend to. I've tried that, and they tend to be right in the final act. This needs to happen, and then bollocks!
I've got the best idea ever. It's But yeah, I think it's inspiring that 15 minutes a day. There are no excuses, and I think the idea is if you do 15, it's like weeding in the garden. I'm a big gardening fan, and if I do the fatal sin on your way back to the house and you see a little weed in the garden and you pluck it, then you just can't stop. You're there on your knees. 2 hours later, your missus is saying, are you coming in for dinner? Oh, I'm just trying to get this one. And I think it's probably the same for writing. If you can actually just show up, even trick yourself into just 15 minutes, once you get started, then maybe that 15 might turn into half an hour, into an hour, 2 hours, and who knows what might happen.
And the other really top tip he gave, and this is really handy if you ever get stuck, and I do this all the time. He's talking about just backing up and rewriting, and then you create a momentum. So if you get to, you could be in that muddy middle, you could be kind of stuck, and you kind of think, well, what happens next? So go back 20 pages, go back to the beginning of the chapter or the previous chapter. Just go through that, rewrite little bits, and as you go, you'll find you're building momentum. You're getting faster and faster and faster. Your writing comes more and more easily. And then by the time you get to that bit where you were stuck, you're thinking, oh yeah, of course, this is what happens. Tapper, tapper, tapper. And you go straight through. And I do that all the time.
And I've never heard of that technique before, and I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. Yeah, it's almost like a kind of a warm-up stretch before you go for your run.
Absolutely.
And I found it interesting as well that he, even 39 novels in, he's used the word daunting every time he starts with a blank page. And even though he's a fast writer, he still, takes him a year to write. And just reminds me of the incredible commitment to the craft that these authors dedicate themselves to.
Yeah, and he's up till recently he said he'd always started with just a blank page, whereas now he's worked with some TV people. He started outlining.
Now that was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah. After 20 books, he started outlining, and that's it's I do a lot of best-selling authors. I think if you talk to the likes of maybe Martina Cole or Ian Rankin, when I've asked them about this, they've said the same thing, which is no, we just go straight in because they know what they're doing, Yeah. Whereas when I started out, I outlined it. I'm now getting to a point where I have a rough outline, but there's a part of me that almost wants to jump in. I'm not sure if I can do it yet, and it will involve a lot of rewriting. But
well, that's the trade-off, isn't it? You never quite know. I guess it depends if you're not a plotter, if you're someone that's a pantser who kind of just dives in and starts writing. I guess the big challenge could be that if something massive comes along, and that's like an earthquake that changes everything that you've kind of previously written, then there's a huge amount of rewriting to do.
Let's shall we do question of the week?
Yeah, good point, actually.
Because this is from Lawrence Doherty, who sent us in this question, which he says, how important is it to plan out the plot of a book before writing? He said, my online episodic novel, Power Surge, good title, Lawrence, like it, began with just one chapter and a vague idea, but as I wrote more, it took me to places I would never have imagined at the start, including the ending, which I've yet to write, hence my fascination with your podcast. Thank you, Lawrence. Is it okay to explore an idea, or should we plan each beat, or are both approaches okay? Well, the glib answer is whatever works for you. I mean, when I work in screenwriting, very often you need to supply an outline because there are people, financiers, producers, who want to know what the hell the film's going to be about. So screenwriting involves a lot of outlining and doing synopses. And I guess, as we've spoken to, say, Shannon, she outlines because she finds that when she gives it to her editor, the editor spots maybe a flaw in the storyline that Shannon hadn't spotted.
Yeah.
But then you get people who jump in with both feet. And I've kind of discussed this on a previous podcast where the fantasy novel I've been working on, I had everything outlined, but there was one character where I found the outline was just a bit dull. It wasn't surprising me. So I completely abandoned it. And it did, as Lawrence says, it took me to places that I would never have gone to otherwise. What's
really interesting as well, though, is that Michael is living proof that you can be both, and even as the same author. I mean, he said he used to not really do much outlining or plotting, and he's obviously written a lot of books that way, but now he does go down the route of plotting in more depth. And I think, I was at a writers' meeting last night in my group, and what I find really fascinating is people define themselves either as a plotter or a pantser. And right. they very much, they get quite defensive if someone questions whether their approach is not the right approach. And you're right. I think it's whatever suits you. But let's talk quickly about what we're doing in our book right now, Mark, because we're in that phase. And
yeah, we're outlining heavily.
And actually, somebody said, you're not talking enough about your book on the podcast. So, I think, in terms of how we've approached it, we're in this massive, really in-depth plotting right now. We haven't actually put really a single word of the actual book down, but we've got, 35 pages of synopsis so far?
But I did today. That's the thing. I started. The thing we have. We have outlined this, and we have an ending. And I think even if we didn't outline, I'd still want to have an ending. I still want to have some kind of idea resolution. But actually today, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read it yet, but I took one of our early scenes with two of our characters interacting with each other, and I basically wrote a scene. Now, whether or not we keep that, as it is, and I'm sure we won't, I'm sure it'll get rewritten, it will change and it will evolve. But it was just fun, me having these two characters talk to each other, fight and conflict with each other. And it's a great way to find out who your characters are. Yeah. And it's part of the outlining process, I guess.
It almost feels in some ways like our book started off as a bit of a, we talked about kind of major points in the book, turning points, and looking at it in kind of acts, breaking it up into acts. And then we started filling out a bit more detail. And then we thought, we've got this big, massive gap. We've got what we felt was a really strong beginning and a good kind of flow into the story then, and then a fantastic kind of ending. And then this big kind of, how do we get between, point C and
And
Why?
you know why? That sort of big middle is where you find out the most about your character, that's where you test your character and you find out who they really are. And the reason we couldn't do that is because we didn't know who they are yet.
Yeah.
We hadn't got to know them. We had an idea of who they are, their foibles and the challenges they would face. But until you sit down and get in the nitty gritty of the the conversation, the dialogue, the action, and putting your character in that situation, you don't always know how they're going to react, and you'll get surprised by that. And I think that's why, outline, but don't be a slave to it. Be prepared to go off the path, because sometimes going off the path is going to. You're going to find something absolutely fascinating.
You might find your way back onto the path, but you've made the journey more interesting by finding a kind of a little alleyway or a detour. And one thing that happened to me, which is really interesting, is that working on part of what's going to happen in the middle, and didn't really know where to go with it, and then thought of a new character, and it was fascinating to see how that new character suddenly gave us 100 different options. And it was weird. It was a Saturday morning and I was sitting there with my iPad, and I'd never think about writing on an iPad. And yet 8 hours later, I almost lost myself in this story. And I'd written 4,000 words of basically outline on an iPad. And I couldn't believe what happened. Has that ever happened to you before? You just kind of like disappear into a world and you don't even realize you haven't had lunch or even breakfast.
Yeah. Well, no, I always eat. We talked about self-care in that NaNoWriMo. I never miss a tea break or a biscuit or a lunch break. But that's a really good sign. That means you're really in the zone there, that you get complete. And if you go away from it, have a cup of tea and you come back and it's like, let's get back into it. That's great. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll start to give you a few more updates about the book. Obviously, we're not revealing much about what the book's about yet, because obviously that's all going to come much closer to the release date of the book, but we will be giving you kind of updates as to the kind of phases that we're going through, because I think everyone...
Funnily enough, I did pitch it to someone we interviewed yesterday.
Really? I didn't know about this. Go on.
Yeah, and it's the first time I pitched it to anyone who knows nothing about it. And
do I want to hear this?
When it got to the bit where she walks in the room and sees that young woman, the bit we're talking about?
Yes.
She gasped. She went, I was like, yes.
Is it a good gasp?
Yeah, good gasp. Yeah, no, it was very good.
Wow, that's really interesting, because we were doing, I did a workshop a couple of weeks ago about pitching your ideas to an editor, because there was a big conference over here in Vancouver and you had like 5 minutes to pitch a story, and it was fascinating to see how challenging it can be to actually pitch a story, but interesting to hear that you've had a decent feedback. Wow. Yeah, things you learn on a podcast, Mark, honestly. It's like
well, it's interesting. I mean, Michael Connelly talked about the ego of the storyteller. You need to be able to put yourself out there, as Maria Semple said in an episode that we haven't actually aired yet. But when we interviewed her, she talked about putting herself out there, that very personal, emotional, raw self. And, when you pitch something, it's like telling a joke and you really have no idea if the joke's going to be funny. And we've all been there.
Yes.
You start telling a joke and you think, oh God, the punchline's weak. The punchline's weak,
Or you can't remember the punchline, and then you have that. Yeah. And it's really true. I've spoken to a few people who've self-published, and they have not even wanted to put it on their Facebook page that they've put a book out there. And it's a huge challenge, because how do you get word out about your book if you can't step out and then say to the world, I wrote this? And I think I go back to music. I always like to bring a music analogy in, but I remember Chris Martin once saying from Coldplay, he said they were on a rush to get an album out. And he said there was one track on there which he can't listen back to it. He thinks it's just the worst thing they ever wrote. And if he could, he would remove it from their back catalogue.
That's up against some stiff competition. Hey.
Coldplay. Oi, easy. Big Coldplay fan this end. But I love Coldplay. They're awesome. Anyway, but the interesting thing is that it's okay to look back at what you've done in the past and say, in fact, I'm getting into the minute motivation here, so I'm going to dive straight into that.
Go for it.
It's okay to go look back into the past and look at some of your work and not be particularly happy with it. Honestly, I look back at some of the first things I did in music and they are cringeworthy, like laughable, but they were a stepping stone. And so I think we have to rejoice in the fact that we grow as writers. And the fact that if we look at stuff we wrote even last week or last year or 10 years ago and we see the difference, then that's a positive thing because we've actually got better as a writer. If the thing that'd be more worrying in some ways is if we look back at our work 10 years ago and we thought, yeah, that's actually really good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say to everyone who's written a book and has not really pushed it because they think it's absolutely terrible, rejoice in the fact that you're noticing that you are a much better writer today, because that's the gift that book was to you. It's a stepping stone on the road to success as a writer. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Stay?
Oh, completely. I mean, just Michael said he started writing when he was 19 and he wasn't published till he was 35. If he had been published when he was 19, he would probably be trying to burn every copy of the novel that was published because he will have advanced so much as a writer. I do worry sometimes because, you know, you hear these news stories, a 17-year-old publishes novel, worldwide sensation, blah, blah, blah. You don't very often hear from them again. And, you know, it's a shame because it can kill their career before it's even begun. There's some essential things to be a writer. You need to have grieved. You need to have loved and have your heart broken. You need to have had a shitty boss. You know, you need to have experienced some really horrible things in order to become a writer. And that's why most writers kind of hit their stride in their kind of mid-30s, because around about then you've lived life a bit, you know. And this might sound like a grumpy old man, which
no, not at all, Mark.
Which
you auditioning?
Cynical, grumpy old goat that I am. But, you know, my daughter writes and I say to her, yeah, keep writing. But the stuff you're writing now isn't going to get published, but you can only get better. But it might
like
take
a bit of encouragement there, Mark.
Yeah, but, you know, but going
Which
back
is
to
really
the
weird, though. No, that's really interesting, though, because my daughter, who's I think a couple of years younger than yours, she's also already decided in her mind she wants to be an author. And I read her work and I take a completely different approach. I say to her that I think what she's doing at 14 is incredible. And I think, you know what, go for it. And I she pitched to an agent at this conference the other day in Vancouver.
Yeah,
so
the worst thing that can happen to her is if she's published as a teenager.
do you think so?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I think that now we might have to beg to differ. This is good. Good bit of conflict. We like a bit of conflict on the show. But we're just letting you into the world of one of our writing sessions, by the way, folks.
Yeah.
we had a bit of one yesterday where neither of us were budging on this one thing. We're like, no, I think. But let's put it this way. Is it about the person's age that's important? Or is it about how they approach the situation? Because I think, you know, at what point does a teenager become an adult, and why is it that when they become an adult it's okay to be published when it's not okay to be published as a teenager?
Well, you know, if they're writing from the experience of being a teenager and writing about teenage life and it's truthful and honest, then that's great. That's a valid story, you know. But literature, the history of literature is littered with the corpses of careers of teens who were published too soon.
Yeah, totally agree with you. It's a bit like the child actor that is almost burnt out by the time they've not even reached the end of their teenage life. But I tend to look at every individual as unique. And when we talk about, now interestingly, you come from the traditional publishing world. So when you talk about published, you're probably talking about traditionally published as opposed to self-published.
Yeah. I mean, self-publishing, fill your boots. You know,
I think so. Because
the other thing is
practice, isn't it? Right?
And you can delete that.
You can delete it, but you also learn the process, which is actually one of the big things we're going to be going through. Like, how do you actually publish a book? The marketing. I would encourage teenagers to go get published, but self-published is an absolutely brilliant way to start. And actually, it's the way to go now, because then if you do get success, now there's a question for you. If you did get success self-published, should you then sign traditional, or should you keep self-publishing till you're an adult?
That's a good question. I mean, that's the thing. The pressure, the expectation, and the public face that you get from being published by traditional publishing just increases, you know, your visibility and the kind of criticism you're going to get. And, you know, your failure, if it happens, will be all the more visible. Whereas if you're self-publishing, I mean, I started...
Failure builds success, Mark. You have to fail. And I know it can be a problem at a very young age, because it's bad enough failing as an adult and getting caught.
Yeah, but I failed very quietly in my local theatre. I wrote play after play after play, and, we would have 30, 50 people come to each showing.
Yeah.
And none of those plays were great, but each one got better and better, and I learned my craft that way. And that was when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And before that, I was writing at home and failing quietly on my own, but learning all the time. Now, if you do your learning in public, then the knockbacks are all the bigger. The wave of criticism you'll get could kill a career before it's even started.
Yeah,
it's not everyone's as forthright and determined as you, because there are writers are generally very insecure, very anxious people. And I think it's better to learn your craft. It's what we said before about not sending the book out before it's ready either.
Yeah.
And if you're putting stuff out there when you're a teenager and it's not ready, and people will, you know what the internet's like, people will go, this is shit. And if you're 17 or 18 dealing with this is shit, you can't always deal with that. You might not have the mental faculties to deal with that properly, and it kills your career before it's even got anywhere. And I think you do. You have to live life. You have to toughen up. You have to get a bit of a thick skin. So, go for it, but be prepared for a bit of a kicking once you put it out there.
I love this. I love the fact that we are so opposite ends of the spectrum. It's beautiful yin and yang.
Well, that's why I'm on the show. I'm the voice of cynicism.
No, but I also like this. I think and I want to say I totally respect where you're coming from, and I totally get what you're saying, and I'm not in any way saying what you're saying is right or wrong. But I just come from a very different world, because when we have dinner together, I sit down with my family and I say, right, kids, how did you fail today? And I get them to tell me what they screwed up with, and we all applaud them and we cheer them on and say, brilliant. Because for me, failure, look at every successful author. Been there before with, the things like J.K. Rowling. Failure is actually part of the learning, even as an adult.
Yeah,
like J.K.
totally
Rowling.
agree.
We wouldn't have Harry Potter if it wasn't for failing.
But she didn't fail in public. She was learning her craft all the time leading up to Harry Potter.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the rejection. She kept getting rejection after rejection, and she kept going through the
She would also have written novels before that weren't any good, and my worry...
I'm wondering because I've always wondered about what did she do before Harry Potter? Because I don't know any of the backstory. Anyway, that's for another episode, I think. But I think it's a good thing that we disagree on this, because like I say to people in music, if we all like the same music, what a boring, dull place the world would be. And I think it's the spice. It'll all come out in a novel, guys. Don't you worry about it. This is going to be great. But I think one thing that we didn't fail on this week, which was great, was we started using Scrivener as a shared file. And we talked about this last week, about how I managed to open up Scrivener on my PC, even though Mark had done it in the Mac. And what I found really fascinating this week is that we had to work out how we were going to share this. So we put it in Dropbox. And I've done this before with music, where I've shared files with another composer, and we get all kinds of problems. Because if anyone's ever used Dropbox before, if you open a file while someone else is opening it, you get all kinds of conflicts. And Scrivener actually has a built-in feature that I discovered completely by accident this week, which is when I tried to open the Scrivener file that Mark was actually working on at the same time, Scrivener actually came up with the window and said, this file is currently locked as someone else is working on it. That, in my book, is a genius part of the software. Because
it saved our bacon today, because I sadly left the file open on my laptop, so Mark couldn't get in there. So I got an email from, can I get into the file, please? So, otherwise you'd have been gleefully working away, overwriting everything.
Exactly, because if it was a Microsoft Word file, we'd have been basically overwriting each other's work. And could you imagine, the anguish and pain? So this piece of software has really, really been thought through, and it's a joy to work with. So if you haven't tried it, please do get along to their website, literatureandlatte.com. Try it for the 30-day free trial. And when you start collaborating, as we are, and maybe you get an editor who's a Scrivener user as well, that feature is going to save your bacon. So thank you, Scrivener, for thinking from the writer's perspective, it's absolutely awesome stuff. So, Mark, do you want to tell us about how the book's going, The Writer's Vault of Gold?
Well, of course, we're going to add Michael Connelly to this now. So all his genius will be in there for free for you to download. So just come along to the website, sign on to the bestseller list, which is our mailing list. And if you've got one already, just come along and update. It's, update to the latest version. So there's some great stuff to come. We will have on there, people like Joe Abercrombie and Maria Semple and Michelle Paver. And it's just fantastic. So subscribe, join the mailing list. Just get on board, because this is all free. It's all free, people, and it's like the University of Writing.
Excellent stuff. Now, don't forget as well, we're going to be doing NaNoWriMo specials. So if you're in the process of currently trying to write 50,000 words in a month, look out for our midweek specials that will be coming out. We've got a special coming up in a few weeks with Grant Faulkner again, who's going to help people who are hitting that, what we call the muddy middle, which is that point where you basically hit the wall and think about giving up. And that, is good advice, whether you're doing something like NaNoWriMo or Remo. We have to work out which way we say that, don't we, Mark? I always said Rimo, but we all need help. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it in a month or you're listening to this and you're in the middle of your novel and you're spending a year doing it like we are. There's always that kind of middle brick wall. So the advice that we get from Grant is great. So do check in for that. And also, if you're listening on iTunes, or if you haven't done already, please do subscribe, rate and review. We so appreciate all the incredible reviews that you're putting in. Thank you so much for that.
Brilliant reviews.
Yeah, we really do appreciate it. It keeps us going, and we do enjoy reading them. We do read everyone. So please do pop along there.
And let us know how you're getting on with your book. If you're coming on this journey with us, drop us a line on Facebook at Bestseller Experiment, or Twitter is at BestsellerXB. We've got all the quotes from our authors up on Pinterest and the books that they've written as well. And I'm on Instagram at BestsellerXB too.
Absolutely. And don't forget, if you've got a question for us, you can go to the Facebook site, any of the social media sites, or the website bestsellerexperiment.com. And we should also mention that we do have this special giveaway book as well for people who are going through the 50,000 word goal right now, with some extra special tips. So if you haven't been to the website yet, do get there, because we've also got some really cool little extras that we haven't put on the podcast, which you can listen to as well, such as the 5 tips every writer should know, analysing Breaking Bad, which is something Mark and I did as a special just last week. So do pop along. There's a lot of great content on the website as well. So until next week, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic week writing. And Mark, it's goodbye from...
Goodbye from Mark Squared. That's what Bryan Cranston called us. So we are Mark Squared.
There we go. And we don't have to argue anymore, even though it's good to fail. Thank you,
I'm
Mark.
not saying it's not bad to fail. That's not what I meant. All I said was, don't get published when you're a teenager. I'm not saying it's not bad. To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.